When you're faced with an opportunity, how do you respond? Do you see only the difficulties that might arise should you accept the challenge of the new opportunity? Or do you see an opportunity to better your situation? You know, your perspective really makes all the difference in the world. And we sometimes glibly say, is the glass half full or half empty? I mean, we're both looking at the same glass, but how are you looking at it matters more than just looking at it. How are you going about seeing your situation? In Numbers chapter 14, we read about a congregation of people, actually chapter 13 and 14. We read about a congregation of people that were presented with an opportunity, but they saw only the pitfall, only the challenges. They lacked faith in God. There were, on the other hand, a couple of individuals here, and they're named. They stand out from the crowd because they had a different attitude, had a different outlook. You remember when Moses dispatched the 12 spies to go through the land of Canaan to come up with a plan of attack, how we're going to go in and possess the promised land. Finally, after all these years of waiting, God's going to give us what He's promised us. This is a grand opportunity. So how do we respond? Well, we dispatched 12 spies that come back, and this is what happened. In verse 26, they departed and they came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. You continue reading into chapter 14, God is enraged, and rightly so, at the lack of faith on the part of this congregation. In fact, God was so enraged that many years later he would reference this very episode in Hebrews chapter 3. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation, in the day of temptation, in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Wherefore, I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their heart, and they've not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end. While it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they had heard, did provoke. Howbeit, not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom swear that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believed not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Now this puts an interesting twist to what we're saying here today. It's not so much a question of whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. In our case, it's really more, are you a man or woman of faith versus one who lacks faith in God? So when presented with an opportunity, how do you respond? Do you focus on all the challenges this new opportunity will present to you? Or do you think about what grand opportunities are afforded to you, and with God's help, you will be able to accomplish? How do you respond? In chapter 14, verse 24, Caleb, God said, had a different spirit in him. That's why he was allowed to enter into the land of rest. What attitude do you live your life with? What attitude do we operate this congregation with? Really, when you look at Numbers 13 and 14, we see illustrated for us biblically the difference between the pessimist and the optimist. Consider what this unknown author said about an optimist. An optimist believes we live in the best of all possible worlds. A pessimist fears this is true. The tire is only flat on the bottom. Winners see risk as opportunity. They see the rewards of success in advance. They do not fear the penalties of failure. The winning individual knows that bad luck is attracted by negative thinking, and that an attitude of optimistic expectancy is the surest way to create an upward cycle and to attract the best of luck most of the time. Winners know that so-called luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. If an individual is not prepared, he or she simply does not see or take advantage of a situation. Always opportunities are around, but only those who are prepared utilize them effectively. And so in the book of Numbers, we read of Joshua and Caleb, and then of the other 10 spies. Both groups saw exactly the same situation. Those two men said, we are well able to overcome. The other 10 said, it can't be done. Because they said it can't be done, because they lacked faith in God, they aimlessly wandered for 40 years until that entire generation died. Now, interestingly, after that period of wandering, Caleb not only went into the land of Canaan along with Joshua, but at the age of 85, he approached his friend Joshua and said, give me this mountain. I believe it's that mindset, that optimistic, faith in God mindset that prolongs our life, strengthens our days, gives us the ability, even in old age, to continue doing that which pleases God. So what attitude do you have? You know, the history of mankind, the Bible, personal observation make it clear that our attitude, our outlook, can mean the difference in life or death, success or failure. We looked at the optimist a moment ago. Let's look at the pessimist for a moment. The first law of human interaction: if anything can go wrong, it will. And its corollary: if anything just can't go wrong, it will anyway. And the second law of the pessimist: when things are going well, something will go wrong. And its corollary: when things just can't get any worse, they will. And there's a second corollary to this one. Anytime things appear to be going better, you've overlooked something. I know people, and I don't say this with any joy at all. I know people who live their entire existence with this mindset. They truly did. The most negative, pessimistic, woe is us, woe be us mentality I've ever encountered in my life. And it's sad. It's tragic. Consider what this writer said. Again, these are unknown sources to me. If you think the problem is bad now, just wait until you've solved it. You know, when you think about this mindset, it's stifling. It prevents us from ever going forward, from ever progressing, ever doing anything of any consequence, because we're always fearful that something will go wrong. Nothing will ever be attempted if all possible objections must first be overcome. That's my response to the pessimist. A pessimist can hardly wait for the future so he can look back with regret. You know, you can say what you want about Ronald Reagan. I know we've had a lot of comments about this former president of ours. He's mentioned quite a bit in the news every time there's an election cycle, his name comes up. He seems to be kind of a standard. In one sense, politically speaking, he's a standard of which others are trying to achieve. Now, I remember very well when Ronald Reagan was president. The mainstream media hated the man. They made fun of the man. They said he's not capable of being president. He's only an actor, etc. It lacks intelligence. Generally, I'm just saying this for the record, the mainstream media, when they don't like someone, that's someone of a conservative Christian worldview, they're going to make fun of their intelligence. I just think you ought to know that, in case you haven't noticed that already. They're going to question your intelligence. And they did the same thing with Ronald Reagan. Now that he's dead, of course, everyone is measured by him. Now, it's interesting because his mindset was early recorded as far as his attitude about this country. Why was he elected in 2 landslide victories? I believe it's because he had great faith in this country and in the people of this country. People loved him because he loved them, and they responded accordingly. In 1973, well before he became president, he said, and this gives you some insight into his mindset, he said, there's no question that we have failed to live up to the dreams of the founding fathers many times and in many places. Sometimes we do better than others, but all in all, the one thing we must be on guard against is thinking that because of this, the system has failed. He added, the system has not failed. Some human beings have failed the system. And again, he said in 1974, we are the showcase of the future, and it is within our power to mold that future this year and for decades to come. It can be as grand and as great as we make it. No crisis, he added, is beyond the capacity of our people to solve. No challenge too great. People responded to a positive message. He said, we in government should learn to look at our country with the eyes of the entrepreneur, seeing possibilities where others see only problems. This was in his presidency in 1985. Regardless of your political point of view, Reagan remains one of the greatest presidents our nation has ever known. He got us back on track financially when we were in an abysmal state from the 1970s, and he brought the Soviet Union to her knees, and she has not yet recovered. Perhaps is trying to do so with a little saber rattling, but nevertheless, major accomplishments from a man who showed and demonstrated time and again faith in this country. My mother used to teach me, and I don't know for the life of me why. Son, you'll attract more flies with honey. I don't like flies. I've never wanted to attract flies, but she taught me you will attract more flies with honey than vinegar. I understand, of course, the point she's making. There have been periods of times in my life when I have been accused of looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses. And I want to respond to that by saying I think there's something to be said about those glasses. They may be tainted, but in my humble opinion, they are tainted with faith in God. And I'm not at all ashamed to say that I view the world optimistically. And there may be times when I struggle with that. And admittedly, there have been times when I have struggled with that. If you don't mind indulging me, I want to take a moment to share some personal reflections with you. 1997, I was invited. My father was encouraging it. I'm forever grateful for it. My coming to be the preacher for this congregation. And I'll just be very honest with you. At that point in my life, I was very discouraged. I remember waking up each and every day asking myself out loud, what's the point? Why bother at all? It seemed to me that every time you take several steps forward, you're going to take that many more and some backward. And I'm like, I don't understand how this is supposed to work. This is not in my mind the way I envision things going. So when I came here, I came with a very despondent, discouraged, I didn't want to do this at all mentality. Brother John Vines had a very different attitude. He took a sour individual like myself, and he waited and waited patiently for what seemed like a long time, but it was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years. As he would encourage me, constantly say to me, you're doing a good job, appreciate you, don't know what we would do without you. And there are many things we can do if we just put our mind to it. With God's help, said over and over, he would say things like, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Eventually, he got to me. He helped me immeasurably because he had a positive attitude. I remember meeting elders, deacon meetings, having conversations about what we're going to do with our new auditorium we just built and have almost completely filled to capacity. I do distinctly remember coming to church on Sunday mornings, and it was at times difficult to find a place to sit. We were having a hard time finding places for people to park. We bought the property next door, the house next door. I remember in these business meetings, we were discussing what we were going to do. And there was always this negative voice. We messed up. We shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have done that. So the suggestion was made, we need to swarm and start a congregation in Dallas. Let's just start there. And then maybe we could think about Whitesburg. We could think about swarming and going elsewhere and spreading the borders of the kingdom. We were on fire. And there's this voice. Yeah. We can't do that. You're asking too much of us. There's no way. The same thing we're reading right here in the book of Numbers. Can't be done. Challenge is too great. Don't have enough money, don't have enough resources. You're taking off a bigger bite than you can chew. We let that cancer grow. And now we look around and we say, well, look at all these empty pews. We've sold the property next door. That's just my observation. Now you say, you shouldn't share such things publicly. Why not? It's the truth. We allowed a negative spirit to dominate and almost destroy this church. But you know, brethren, I'm not saying that to fuss or complain. I'm saying presently we are presented with a brand new opportunity. We have a new generation, as it were. We have a new opportunity to create a better spirit, a better attitude, a better outlook. What does the future hold for this congregation? I don't know, but as we sometimes say, I know who holds this congregation. And I know that if we trust in him, that we can do things that will blow our minds, that will expand the borders of the kingdom, and yes, most importantly, bring glory and honor to God, our Maker. which is our primary mission in this world, to bring glory and honor to the name of God and to spread the gospel of Christ to a lost and dying world. That's my view. I hope that you share that view with me. We can look around at the world we live in and say, woe is us, Muslims are everywhere, and they are. And I know this is not popular to say, Muslims don't like us. And no, it is not a peaceful religion. Whenever Islam is practiced consistently, people get their heads chopped off, they get blown up, they get burned in oil. It's not a pretty picture. This is what they want for our country. It's insane, but there are women with their burqas on clamoring for Sharia law in this country, and they're saying that they have a right to say that because they have freedom of speech. Maybe someone should remind them they have such freedom to speak their mind because they live in a once Christian nation. That's why they have that freedom. If Sharia law was here, they'd have to shut their mouths and stay in their houses. It's insane. It's mad. That's the world we live in. A crazy world. And we look around and we say, Muslims are everywhere. They're running for office. About 90 of them running for public office as I speak. And when they get into office, what are they going to do with that power? We already know what they're doing. We know what they're clamoring for. What's left of the Christian worldview in this country will be eradicated. We know that. We say, oh, that's terrible. That's awful. Maybe so. And there's every reason to be upset and disconcerted about it. I mean, of course. But maybe we should see this wave of Islam. Maybe we should see it as an opportunity to spread the gospel. Do you realize some of the fastest growing parts of the world for the Christian faith is in Iran, of all places, Afghanistan, of all places? Why? Because they've been so oppressed by this Sharia law and this insane worldview and religion that they're clamoring for freedom and for new hope and for new life in Christ. So rather than say, oh, woe is us, the world is lost, maybe we could say, look what an opportunity God is affording us. How do we see our situation? Sometimes thoughts like this become just personal thoughts. We all have our personal struggles. Will my business survive? Will I keep my job? Will I have enough for retirement? Will I be able to pay my bills? Well, I mean, we wonder about daily things, and in the back of our mind we hear Matthew 6:33. And we're challenged. If we seek first the kingdom of God, He's going to take care of us. Do we believe Him? Joshua and Caleb believed, and they stood on the promises of God. And they said, we are well able to overcome because God promised to give it to us. Look what God's already done for us. He certainly can do this for us. They believed that. And they were blessed because of it. Those who disbelieved, those who doubted, were cursed because of it. Suffered the wrath of God because of it. What about your personal life? Consider this text in Job chapter 1. There was a day when Job's sons and his daughter were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, the other also came and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell you. And while he was still speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldean made out 3 bands and fell upon the camels, have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell you. While he was still speaking, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are all dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell you. Notice with rapid succession, Job hears calamity after calamity And the climax, your children are all dead. I don't know about you. This is challenging to me. How do you respond to such calamity? Job arose, rent his clothes, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshiped. And he said, naked came I out of my mother's womb. Naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. How would you respond? That's a tough question. I don't know how I would respond to that. I honestly don't. I know I'll be overwhelmed with grief. You know what's sad? And again, we're talking about two different attitudes, two different points of view. Faith versus non-faith. Pessimist versus optimist. But when people many times are faced with crisis, they tend to turn away from God, become angry with God, turn their back on the church, etc. Notice what Job's doing. When his world literally falls apart in front of him, he learns to run to God to worship Him. This assembly now is a place we need to be. If we're struggling, we're hurting, if we're in dire need, this is where we need to be. Not running the opposite direction. Too many find it in their mind and their heart, just turn away from God. He's our strength. He's our help. He's our Savior. In spite of what's happening to us in the world. Notice how Job did not charge God foolishly. It would have been a foolish charge because God didn't do this to Job. Satan did this to Job. But in the end, as James reminded, God was merciful and blessed Job even more than before. I submit to you, brethren, it depends on our outlook and our attitude and our faith or lack of. The future is bright for this congregation. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I believe our better days are ahead of us. How do you see our present situation? Is the glass half full or is it half empty? The songwriter said, "Be not dismayed, whate'er betide. God will take care of you." Will you live in faith or will you live in doubt? Will you live and succeed as an optimist or will you fail as a pessimist? Sometimes this pessimistic attitude involves itself in our question of salvation. God could never forgive me. I'm too far gone. I'm too bad a sinner. And Paul held himself out as an example for others to follow. An example of one who received and obtained mercy from the Lord. Who was before a blasphemer, a persecutor, injurious. Did many things contrary to the name of Christ. And yet he was placed into the ministry. God can take broken people who ruin their lives in sin, fall in the wrong course, and can make you into the person that you need to be to serve in His kingdom. Are you that person? Do you need to respond today? Can we help you in making things right with God? If so, please stand.